recorded, Richard, that two of them are only observing. Oh, right, you've got it on there, right. Right, well, the minutes then are confirmed. Right. Is there anything from the minutes, Rob, that you wanted to mention?
No, Chairman. No, there's nothing there. I can pick up the conference. There's a short report on the conference, so I can pick up that given the substance of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, right. Item 4, the draft Local Government Wales Bill. Did you all read every word of it? Of course we did. It has that effect, doesn't it? Right, Rob.
Yeah, sure. Yes, thank you, Chairman. A rather a meaty bill, this, Chairman. I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to have a look at it. It is, to call it substantial would be an understatement, really. And it is extremely prescriptive. Some would argue overly prescriptive. But it is extremely lengthy. Of course, this is all sort of dependent on the outcome of the Welsh Government elections in May as to whether or not this bill actually becomes law. And the most crucial part of the bill is in sort of part 1, and that is the proposal for local government reorganisation and the formation of 8 or 9 counties within Wales. It'll be, as I say, interesting to see what the results of the election are, and then on the back of that then to see whether or not this reorganisation in this form comes to pass. My understanding is it's still pretty unpopular amongst local government members, and the current minister still is in a battle, really, I think, with the Welsh Local Government Association. So it'll be interesting to see what comes to pass on this. But as I say, the bill is extremely weighty and very, very prescriptive. So part 1 talks about the establishment of the new 8 or 9 counties. And it's 8 or 9 because it's whether or not the county boroughs in North Wales either become 2 or 3. So that's still open for some debate there. Part 2 talks about introducing a general power of competence. That's already in force in England under the Localism Act 2011, and the general power of competence is really a power of first resort, and basically councils, rather than worrying about whether or not they've got powers to do certain things, this general power of competence will kick in. I think councils, perhaps I would say this as a lawyer, still need to be careful that they do have powers to do things, because if there is already a power in existence, the general power of competence will be secondary to that already existing power. So that's already in place in England. Then part 3 talks about the access, duty to promote access and public participation in local government. Very, very worthy sort of goals, if you like. I must admit the council, or this council already takes great steps to try to encourage local participation, engages large consultation exercises with interested groups. Again, in my view, this perhaps part of the bill is sort of overly prescriptive, and indeed lots of the things that it suggested councils already do. The next part of the bill talks about the establishment of these community area committees. And from my own point of view, this is where the bill does get into difficulties in a way. So the rationale behind it is you're going to have much larger counties established in Wales, and each of the counties then will have these community area committees established. And from my way of thinking, and I've been to a talk that was given by Welsh Government officials, it's almost the establishment then of a sort of another tier of local government, it seems to me, with the establishment of these community area committees. So they will have to be serviced by democratic services officers. They'll be allowed to take certain decisions on certain things. It seems to me to be another layer of local government, really, and perhaps it hasn't been thought through enough as to how this will come into effect in practice. Next part then are the improvement duties and the ability of certain community bodies to make improvement requests. Again, perhaps a laudable aim to have people engaged, talking to the council, wanting the council to do certain things. But again, it'll be interesting to see how these things pan out actually in practice. The next part, which is part 4, is of, I think, particular interest to this Standards Committee, and indeed all the Standards Committees in Wales. And this is where the bill becomes extremely prescriptive. So it's setting out what it calls performance duties for councillors, and these performance duties will include to attend all committee council meetings of which the councillor is a member, hold 4 surgeries each year, respond to correspondence within 14 days, undertake dean training, which is mandatory by the council, and publish an annual report. Well, already councillors can publish annual reports. Councillors do attend training, and it's clearly good practice for them to attend training. For example, particularly planning committee members, if they're determining planning applications, they need to know what, get a feel for what they're actually doing. I'm not sure that the bill is that helpful, for example, by saying, oh, you must have 4 surgeries each year. What happens if you don't? Does that make you a bad member? That's the sort of difficulty as I see it, and that's where the in comes for the Standards Committee, because the potential is, and perhaps I'm over-egging the pudding here a bit now, but if a member doesn't attend every meeting without good reason or hold these 4 surgeries, then that member could be hauled before the Standards Committee. Does the fact that a member doesn't attend all meetings or hold 4 surgeries make him or her a bad member? In my view, it clearly doesn't. But it's a moot point, and I'd be interested actually to hear what members of the Standards Committee thinks about this, because this is generated quite lively debate amongst Montrose officers in Wales. Perhaps we can return to that when we open the paper up. The next duty again, I think it's pretty obvious, and I think indeed it is being done. There'll be duties placed on group leaders to take reasonable steps to promote and maintain high conduct of standards by members of the group. Well, again, that seems to me pretty obvious, and I think it would be done. That's the point of forming a group in local government, really.
Presumably it's something they do forward.
Indeed, indeed. You know, I know certain councils have more difficulties, but again, it seems to me that seems to be overly prescriptive. This is a nice one. The role of head of paid service is to be the chief executive. Right, there we are. And the leader must prepare and publish a report and review the objectives of the chief executive. That happens here already. So we're ahead of the curve there.
That's where you're placed after 2020, of course.
Yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. Next proposal to allow voting rights for co-opted members of select committees. Again, that our select committees can already do that. We allow that. This is an interesting one. Standards committees to prepare annual reports on the exercise of their functions. Well, we can do that if that's seen fit. Part 5, going on to Part 5, a general duty on county councils to make, implement and comply with governance arrangements for the purpose of securing good governance, accountability and economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use, that should be, rather than sue, of resources. Well, once again, that's pretty, pretty obvious, I think. This next one is of particular interest to Irene, the proposed changes to town and community councils, but these won't come into effect until post-2020, so some way off. But I think the plan is, of the current Welsh Government anyway, is to reduce the number of town and community councils and perhaps to get them to join together to become larger councils. So again, in as an outsider looking in, maybe does that potentially then create another layer of local government with these larger and presumably more powerful town/community councils? I don't know.
So
but
they would be extra?
Yeah, well, at the moment, at the moment, the community and town councils are in existence, but I think the current Welsh Government thinking is that there are too many town and community councils, and maybe then post-2020, some point in the future, to look at possibly amalgamating those town and community councils. So, for example, in Monmouthshire, we've got, I think it's 34, Rich, is it? It's about that. 33, thank you, Rich. So we've got 33 town and community councils. That figure is likely to reduce if this bill comes into law. I think the Electoral Commission will do some work on this, looking at boundaries of these new town and community councils. But I think that's the thinking. And then finally, in Part 7, there's the establishment of the Staff Commission. And again, that's arguably centralising power, if you like, to this commission on workforce matters. And the Welsh ministers can produce guidance, such guidance to include planning by public bodies in relation to the size and composition of their workforce, recruitment and retention of staff of public bodies, the management, organisation and remuneration of staff of public bodies, training and development of staff of public bodies. So, again, it seems to me that the Welsh Government proposes to take a more active, maybe centralising role in arguably the recruitment of staff. What does that mean? Does it mean that throughout Wales, chief executives, for example, will be on the same sort of range of salaries? It takes in some ways, it takes the power from the individual council to appoint members of staff, it seems to me. It may not come to pass, it may not work out in practice that way, but certainly there is a potential for it. So that's a quick run through of this new bill. And as I say, just to re-emphasise that the bill is very much dependent upon what happens at the next local government, the Welsh Government elections in May. And as I say, we'll all observe, I'm sure, with interest as to what will happen at those elections. I'm quite happy to take questions, Chairman, on that. As I say, it really is a huge tome of a bill, this.
Chair,
Yes, Doug.
2 or 3 points of interest to start with. The Abergavenny Town Council, Mayor Lannerton, suggested, when we looked at the Boundary Commission suggestions, we said that Land Forest and Anterior Pathology, which is our 2 main areas, you can't really separate them, should be all merged together. The subsidiary councils were horrified at the thought of doing exactly. But it does make sense, quite frankly. The town population, including kids, is about 9,000, and I think the 2 larger things are probably populations of 5 each, maybe now. So, the whole thing, we'd still only end up with a town or a council with a population of probably just
20,000.
and it does make sense. The other point is that, there are so many small community councils, and they will defend their territory to the better end, but it doesn't make sense anymore to have a community council of, say, 900 people, of which, they have a full complement of 6 councillors and others. There is some sense in the bill of merging, certainly at town community level. I'd like to touch on the other point I want to let on, two other points, is this question about independent members. As you know, last week we had a request, this is at county council level, we had a request that the spare senior salary should be allotted to the largest opposition party, which is second largest, which is the independent group. We argue, or there is an argument, if you're independent, how can you go on to a group? They lost that because we weren't prepared to give the extra salary anyway. But it's a point that tax, I think even Robert's expertise to satisfy that, because the independents are treating themselves as a group. And I just wonder if that's really possible.
Before Doug goes on any further, on that point, like 2 meetings prior to that, the independents clearly emphasised that it was not a group, it was individual people, independent people. And then they come up with this argument, motion, at the last council meeting for this extra payment. It was the wrong time, to be honest with you, because we'd already set this year's. If it had come in for the AGM, they might have had a point in May. But I think they shot themselves in the foot by saying at one meeting they won the independent group, and then the meeting last week they were saying they requested this amount of money. So I think they need to sort this out.
Thank you, David.
The third point is about the area committee, which is in part 3, if I remember right. Yeah. It's an interesting idea, and it may make sense at the end of the day. If you've got this much larger council, if you're going to need, such as we have at the moment, Monmouthshire is split into 4 areas, and we have 4 area committees. Not all of them work well, but in the main, the one that I'm involved with, which is Brittany Crum, there are 15 county councillors representing the area. They work
Chairman, if I can help there, this is all, of course, conjecture at this stage, but it would seem possible, I think, that, for example, Monmouthshire, if Monmouthshire was part of this larger Greater Gwent Authority, and members will no doubt be aware, we're talking now about a council servicing a population of about 600,000 people. So Monmouthshire currently services 93,000. So we're talking a much, much bigger council. And the Community Area Committee, it could be, well, in my eyes, it'll be a North and South Area Committee for Monmouthshire, I think. But the interesting thing for me then will be the allocation of what functions these area committees will deal with. You know, will they have the ability, for example, to allocate resources? You know, it would obviously be delegated down from the main council, but it will be interesting. Obviously, the ward members within the area would be on it, but the bill talks about representatives of each community council being on there, representatives of bodies exercising functions of a public nature, and representatives from the third sector. Now, again, will these other members, if you like, have full voting rights? Will they have to sign up to the code of conduct of the council? Will their standards of behaviour be looked at by this committee, or the Standards Committee of the Greater Gwent Authority? So there are numerous questions there, but perhaps in theory these community area committees are a good idea, but my point is just how they will work in practice, and the servicing of those committees will be an important aspect of that. But as I say, the proposal is that this area will have the largest council in Wales, 600,000 people. So it will be an entirely different beast. I think the number of councillors, off the top of my head, I think it's proposed, I think about 110. So we are talking a different animal totally here.
There is no suggestion in the bill as to what will, that I can see in your summary, as to what would be the functions of the CHC. It says they can delegate, the councils can delegate down or restrict what's delegated.
Yes.
It doesn't specify anything.
No, I don't think the bill talks of what particular functions these will look at. But I guess the principle is more local decision making, isn't it? I think, because if you form these larger councils, and the theory behind that is to develop and get economies of scale, by doing that you lose local bit of it, don't you? And I think this is the way of establishing that you know, local decision making role. But these will be important committees if they come to pass, no doubt about it. And again, there is a potential, if you like, about the politics of the matter, maybe, for them to be, you know, get into conflict maybe with the overarching Greater Gwent County Council. But you know, it's interesting, and it'll be, if it does come to pass, as I say, we will be living in very, very interesting times. For sure.
It might be interesting if you looked at the Brinnicombe area now. The population of Brinnicombe is probably, off the top of my head, somewhere between 20 and 25,000. That would make quite a good sort of evolved area, which, you know, so what part of, you know, all this does the town council or the committee play? You know, really what you're creating is this area thing could end up by being which is what
Two matters immediately come to mind here. Firstly, so far as this issue that we've just been discussing, if there is the view by Welsh Government to create a more economic or more efficient means of providing services within the Greater Gwent, and then we're going to have subdivisions which are going to have to be supported by officers, what's the actual saving going to be? I mean, if we don't know what the democratic setup is going to be and the amount of officer allocated time to each subdivision, how can anybody say there's going to be any saving in the provision of government in South East Wales? That's the one point. The other point is on part 4, that's the performance duties of councillors. It doesn't say whether councillors actually have to sit on any of these committees, because as we presently stand, there are a number of councillors who sit on no committees at all. And because each committee is politically balanced, that means that the remaining councillors who actually are prepared to sit on committees sit on more committees than perhaps is good for them. So unless there's some prescription demanding that councillors sit on committees as opposed to merely going to full council meetings, there's going to be a problem there. And what'll happen, you'll have councillors saying, I'm not prepared to sit on committees if there's going to be some prescription by this committee as to their failure to attend. Many problems.
Just on observations then, on part 4, then as you say, oh, sorry. Is that all right? I have pressed, but it's all right now, is it? It was red. It's red, so that should be all right, fine. It's just, I mean, this is obviously just put out as a consultative document, but I mean, it should go without saying that councillors attend all meetings. You know, I think it looks a bit silly to put that in there. The 4 surgeries, I agree. What if you wanted a 5th surgery? Are you not allowed then to call it? So that is a silly one. We already have an instruction that they have to reply to correspondence. So I think there's a lot of fleshing out needed there. On the community council, I must admit, as a community councillor, I find it very hard to understand why they want to get rid of community councils, because we don't cost very much and we are local. We know what the problems are and we deal locally. We don't make big decisions, we make recommendations. And I honestly feel that if you set up another committee, it'll be remote and you will not get people volunteering to sit on a committee outside of their neighbourhood because they won't be as interested. This is where we see county councillors taking over. Also, I think if you set up a bigger committee, which it looks as if they will, they'll be looking for a budget. They'll be looking to make decisions on their own. And so I think there's going to be a conflict on who makes the decisions, where money is spent. I really think it's a backward step to get rid of community councils when I think they're doing a very good job at the moment and not costing very much apart from clerking.
Not being a spokesman today for the Welsh Government or anything, I think first of all the proposal, this won't be talked about until post 2020, and furthermore, I think the political line is we're not trying to get rid of community or town councils, but maybe look to amalgamate some of them to make them more useful organisations. Maybe I think I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but this won't happen for some time. But it does, I think, highlight the conflict, frankly, between big is beautiful because, as I say, you may get economies of scale. Interestingly, I forget what the studies show about the potential savings that local government organisation will allegedly produce, but it's all done in the medium term. You know, there's no doubt about it that if this happens, this is going to cost the public in the short term. You know, it's bound to. The interesting thing about the Part 4 and you know the powers or potential powers for this standards committee is, for example, just because members may attend all meetings, they may not be proactive in those meetings. I personally, I think that is far too prescriptive to say, oh, you must hold 4 surgeries a year. You know, members have different ways of dealing with their constituents. For example, more sort of rural wards in the county, members may deal with their constituents differently to members in the towns, for example. I think there's potential there for the Standards Committee to be put in a pretty difficult position, frankly, to say, you know, I'm hauling you before the Standards Committee because you haven't had these 4 surgeries. I think it's a bit sledgehammer to crack a nut, but there we are. That's just my view, and we'll see when the guidance is produced on this bill, if it becomes law, how it will pan out.
Thank you, Rob. Staying with Part 4, does anybody have any other views on the sense or otherwise of hauling councillors before this committee for breaches of these 5 points? David?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On the first part of attending meetings on Part 4, I think councillors, when they put their names forward, they know what they're putting their names forward for. So they should be committed to attending meetings, unless it's because of illness or holidays, a genuine reason. This business of people looking around in council meetings, oh, so-and-so's not here, I'll put their apologies in, I don't think that works, and it's not acceptable. And to hold 4 surgeries, some county councils hold more than 4 surgeries now. So, you know, and it's like Rob said, we all got different ways to get out to our wards. Responding to correspondence within 14 days, well, yes, I don't disagree, but if that's for councillors, what about officers? Right?
Well, if I could assist on that one, Chairman, the council obviously has corporate standards on dealing with correspondence, but emails, telephone calls, etc., etc. And the response times, I think, is 10 days for the council, 10 working days, that is, which, you know, I think is very generous and should be, you know, should be adhered to. I don't see, you know, I don't see why it shouldn't be. So yeah, so those are real interest to attend the numerous training events, frankly, that the council puts on for members. As regards the annual report, I think, now I don't know whether this was dropped, that talk about the annual reports has been done in the past, and it may not be mandatory at the moment, but it is possible for a member to prepare an annual report. And then as regards holding surgeries, answer that is clearly no. They don't have to hold surgeries, but I would be surprised, frankly, if any member didn't hold a surgery or dealt with constituents' problems on a pretty, well, sometimes daily basis, I would imagine. Finally, then, responding to correspondence. If you remember, I brought a paper here to Standards Committee, which I then took on to Council, because at the end of this, I'm out of the Council. The council at that time didn't want to go along with the recommendations of the paper. Quite a lively debate actually we had on that occasion, if I recall. But perhaps the elected members here can give their own experiences of responding to correspondence. In my own view, if you fail to respond to correspondence, you're leaving yourself open, frankly, to some complaint from a constituent member of the public. So that's where we are at the moment as regards behaviour expected of or performance, rather, that would be perhaps more accurate, the performance of members currently.
Thank you. Do any of the councillors wish to respond?
Yeah, I'll respond. I had a chat with David before this meeting and asked him to put on the agenda, because there's some doubt whether I can make the Democratic Services meeting on Wednesday this week. And I asked him would he possibly discuss the non-performance of an officer or officers. There are certain officers who I would be nameless, who do not respond efficiently or quickly enough. And I think what's source for the goose is a source for the gander. You know, if I'm expected to respond, which I do, but you're left in limbo land if the officer you're communicating with doesn't respond. And it drags on and on and on. And I think there's an issue, I think that the head of democracy should take back and say, right, that officers need to think again. And especially those who don't perform as well as they should do. Makes it very embarrassing to you when you're communicating off and on with members of the public and saying, I'm terribly sorry, I'm still waiting for a reply.
I agree with Doug. It is like we got 14 days we have to reply, and as like Rob said earlier on, the officers got for 10 working days, and it is embarrassing when they don't come back to you, and then you've got to go back to the person they're dealing with or have asked you to for information to say sorry, the information I'm waiting for hasn't come back. And then they're saying, well, hang on a minute, you've got a ruling, right? And I'm saying, yes, but I'm keeping within my ruling, but they're not keeping within theirs. And it is difficult, and it can be embarrassing for both councillors. And then when you've got to name the officer because you haven't got the response, that's when it becomes embarrassing as well.
Thank you, David. Yes, they should be held to account. If they have 10 working days, then they should be held to account to that. And it'd speed all the processes up, wouldn't it? Which is the whole point of having time limits on responding. Right. Oh, Trevor, one last one.
Sorry, just on that point, we've never, to my knowledge, had anything before us about failure to respond to communication. But if that's going on, then perhaps is that an area we should look at?
I think, strictly speaking, that would be outside the responsibilities of this committee at the moment. But again, if this came into force, it would fall squarely then within your remit. When I took the paper that came here about sort of response times, that was, in fairness, several councils said, well, look, I don't think we ought to do this yet, because often we are beholden to officers' responses before we can put a response in ourselves. So that was, I think, several members, if I recall correctly, mentioned that point. But my advice to members, if they're having difficulty with officers and getting a response from officers, is to speak to the head of service for that particular particular service. And I'm sure they would be interested to hear from you.
Thank you. I think we've aired the Wales Bill very thoroughly. We shall await further developments with interest. Right, agenda item 5, changes to the members' code of conduct. Rob, I take it you again?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is a sort of a tidying up exercise, really, I think, by the Welsh Government. In paragraph 3 of the report, you will see that the Minister for Public Services of the Welsh Government signed the Local Authorities Model Code of Conduct Wales Amendment Order 2016. As I say, this tidies up a number of areas before the end of this current assembly that will finish very shortly before the elections in May. So, frankly, all of the items that I've mentioned in the paper have been discussed pretty thoroughly, frankly, over the past 3 years, really. But now the order has been made, and the practical effect of the order will be that I'll take a paper to the annual meeting of this council for the council to adopt, if you like, a new code of conduct. Now, the code of conduct will be very, very similar to the old code of conduct, subject to a couple of points that I've mentioned in this paper. And the first one is that, and again, the Minister has talked about this for, gosh, I would guess at least 24, 30 months, frankly, about getting rid of paragraph 10.2b. And if you recall, and I have given the Ombudsman's guidance on paragraph 10.2b, that has caused councils and indeed the Ombudsman some problems in the past. Thankfully here, we've not had any problems with 10.2b because both I and Murray before me, we've always interpreted, as we would argue, 10.2b correctly in that 10.2b affects, and the intention was for it to affect executive decision making and not to preclude ward members dealing with issues in their wards, for example, on planning and licensing committees. We've never actually taken that stance here. So, for example, just because there's a planning application in Councillor, for example, Doug Edwards' ward, 10.2b would preclude him taking part in that decision-making process on planning committee. We've never adopted it that way, which I think is the correct way. And to remove any confusion now, paragraph 10.2b is to be removed from the code. And in the new code that I've attached to this paper, you will see that that it's now gone and gone for good. The second change to the code is in paragraph 61c, and currently members will note that paragraph 61c says you must, and then paragraph C says, report to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales and to your authorities, monitoring officer, any conduct by another member which you reasonably believe breaches this code of conduct. So, again, when the code originally came out, the practical effect of that was that if members observed any potential breaches of the code, it was incumbent upon them to report those breaches to both the Ombudsman and the monitoring officer. And sometimes, with the benefit of hindsight, those alleged breaches were pretty trivial. So, and we'll come on to that in the Standards Conference in a bit, because the Ombudsman doesn't want to be inundated with allegations of pretty trivial breaches of the code. 61C is gone, but interestingly, members can still come and report potential breaches to me as the monitoring officer of this council, and I suppose it puts the monitoring officer now more in the firing line as to whether or not this matter then should be referred on to the Ombudsman. So I think the Ombudsman's theory is to use the monitoring officer as a gatekeeper to prevent these pretty minor allegations sometimes getting to the Ombudsman. Also of relevance here are these local resolution protocols which the council's got, and again, minor breaches of the code, what we call member-on-member complaints. The Ombudsman doesn't really want to be have loads of complaints of that nature, and therefore has said to councils, and indeed we've got one, and I think all 22 councils, the principal councils in Wales have them now. We have local resolution protocols where, for example, if members fall out with one another, to put it crudely, the group leaders, if you like, try to arbitrate a way forward. Since we've had our local resolution procedure here in Monmouthshire, it's been quite quiet, which is quite interesting to me, frankly. I've had a couple of queries on it, but nothing for a number of months now, and nothing has gone anywhere with that local resolution procedure, which again I think is quite interesting. So 61C as regards the Ombudsman's gone, but still members will report any sort of alleged breaches, or can report any alleged breaches to the monitoring officer. Technical stuff now. This order also brings into effect the responsibility for maintaining the registers. That now is the responsibility of the clerks and of the town and community councils. Again, in practice, that is what's always happened. In fact, I can't really recall a time where it was the monitoring officer of this council rather than the clerks of the respective town and community councils that maintained the registers. In practice, that's always been the case, but now it is put into, if you like, it's been appreciated that that's what happens in practice, and therefore the new code has been changed to that effect. And then finally, paragraph D in my report. Again, this is what's always happened in practice, but there is an exemption for town and community councillors to register upfront interests. So members of town and community councils, they need to declare interests as and when those interests arise, and that, if you like, forms their register. They don't need to put together an upfront register as for example, the three county councillors here today have to do. And that upfront register are all the paragraphs in 10.2a of the code. So those are sort of changes to the code. As I say, it's a tidying up exercise, really. The minister then also made another lovely sounding set of regulations. I'll read them out because I always like doing things like this. Local government standards committees, investigations, dispensations and referral, bracket Wales, close bracket, amendment regulations 2016. And again, I've given a quick run through of what those regulations put into force. And again, those regulations or those changes have already, if you like, come into effect, but they've been put into these regulations for the sake of tidying up. So, for example, there are things like the ability to establish a joint standards committee, the ability of Standards Committee to delay the publication of agendas. What that's about is allowing the Standards Committee, if you like, to deal with the matter before the public become aware of it. So therefore you don't, you know, the argument that you've been influenced by members of the public is taken away. The power to refer a report of misconduct to another council standards committee, we've never had to do that. And the power of another standards committee to grant a dispensation where that's thought necessary. Again, we've never had to do that. So those are the two sets of regulations that have been passed. The practical effect will be, I'll put a report to the annual meeting and we'll change our code of conduct just slightly. So 10.2b goes and 6.1c goes as respects the Ombudsman. And the model code I've attached to the paper I produced here. It is very, very similar to the previous code. But personally, as a lawyer, I think it's good that the minister has finally got around to making these regulations, in that it clarifies now where we all are, and all 22 councils, and indeed the town and community councils will now adopt this code for their future reference. Quite happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rob. That was a very clear run-through, and thank you for the paper as well, which was very clear. Any questions of Rob? Irene?
I heard you say you're going to put a report to the annual meeting. Yes. Do you put things in writing to every councillor as well?
Yes, the report will be a report on the agenda of the annual meeting. Annual meeting is quite a lengthy agenda, and that report will just highlight the differences between the new code that we're going to have to adopt, and we do have to adopt it, and what the old code says. And specifically, it's about removing 10.2.1b and 6.1c slightly amended. So all members will be aware, and indeed the general public will be aware of the changes. And all the councils, at least the principal councils, the counties and the county boroughs in Wales, will do a similar report come their annual meetings in May.
Thank you.
Actually, it probably would be a good a good time, excuse me, to mention this. Irene has produced this, Rob, Code of Professional Conduct and Practice for Registered Teachers. It's really a sort of idiot's guide, I guess. It's the main points, this summarising the actual code. Irene, do you want to?
Yeah, I brought that in because we were issuing it when I used to teach, when I was on the General Teaching Council. And it really is a very brief summary of a code that you should be working to, because you know we have these codes and they're pages long. People skip through them. They think they've probably read them, and probably a lot have. But if you had a concise points that everybody could have in a small booklet like that, and ourselves, it's a very good little handy guide to have, and people can then say, they can never say they didn't know. You know, it's given to every teacher, and so I can't see why we can't give us something similar to every councillor and every community councillor, or members of the public, if they wanted to know how accountable the councillors are.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Irene. I will leave it. He's trying to give it back to me. I will leave it, Rob, just in case, just in case the council does want to consider something like that. You've got a template there, really.
There is, and it is quite readable actually. The Ombudsman has produced some guidance, and he's produced two pieces of guidance, one for the community town councillors and the other one for county councillors. It's on his website. It is eminently readable, in fairness to him, and a very, very useful guide. I've also got I've got sort of bits and pieces, and if members felt that was you know, that would be useful, then more than happy to do that. It may be useful for me to produce something like that for the start of the new council next year. Quite, yeah. So it could be that could be useful. So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Irene. That's very useful and helpful.
Thank you, Irene. Oh, sorry.
Just on that, could I just say that the Ombudsman's paper is, I find it personally very, very helpful, because it's written rather in legalese, but in a sort of a correspondence way. So
And gives good examples, I think.
that it's excellent, yeah.
Yeah, it's very useful. I don't know whether it's a sort of a purpley. I don't know whether all members have seen that, but it is very useful. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, item 6, the Standards Conference for
Yes.
Wales.
This is a note that Cardiff City Council prepared as they kindly organised our Standards Conference for 2015. I know that Irene and Trevor were there, and I'm sure that they will inform members of the day's event. I must admit, I thought it was a very useful and enjoyable Standards Conference. The Ombudsman spoke particularly well, very entertaining. So we had a number of, if you like, leaders addressing the conference to start with, and then there were a number of breakout sessions on a number of issues, and those sort of subjects were, and I'll just go through quickly go through them. There was one on social media, and I actually attended that, and if you like, highlighting the potential problem of the use of social media to members. Very, very useful. Patrick Aaron did that with Daniel Herford from the Welsh Local Government Association. Again, I thought that was pitched in the right way. I'm not sure if Trevor and Irene went to that one, but it was, there we are. Very useful. And also, Trevor's holding up there, the WLGA have produced some guidance on social media. Now, I've passed that on to members in the past. And again, it's sort of eminently readable, and hopefully members won't fall foul of using social media with the best intention. The next breakout session that members could have gone to was on whistleblowing. I'm going to bring a report actually to our June meeting about whistleblowing, because interestingly, whistleblowing is part of the remit of this Standards Committee. And I've had a look at previous agendas. I don't think we've ever produced a paper on whistleblowing, so I'm keen to do that in June. Whistleblowing is very, very important. It's I forget what the act's called, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, I think it's called PIDA. That's what that's the basis or the statutory basis for the idea of whistleblowing. And whistleblowing members in general terms is where officers, employees, but indeed could be other people, come across something which is serious, and they feel it's not right, then that's drawn to the attention of their employer, but they're protected under the Act as long as the disclosure isn't vexatious or just troublemaking. Whilst we've had a whistleblowing policy for some time, the council, it's not been used a great deal, but I sorry. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. No trouble. Whilst we've had a whistleblowing policy for some time as a council, it's not been used greatly, but it has been used, which I think is healthy. I won't give specific details about the incidents of whistleblowing in the report, but I'll refer generally to them. But that's an important safeguard, I think, a useful piece of legislation that I'll talk about in our June meeting. The next session then, or the next available breakout session, was on community councils. I'm not sure whether Irene went on that. If she did, doubtless she'll tell members in a short while. Then we had a local complaints resolution given by Paul Lucas of Rhondda and Taff. And again, the Ombudsman's very keen on these local resolution procedures as a way, if you like, for councils to resolve things before it gets to him. And indeed, and I think this is right, members of the public must exhaust the internal complaints policy of an organisation, of a council, before the Ombudsman will consider it. And then I think the Ombudsman gave this session, which is the 5th one, are the Nolan Principles fit for the purpose in the current climate and for the next 20 years? And there was a workshop on that. As I say, I thought it was a very useful day. It was quite well attended. You know, it's useful from the point of view of meeting other Standards Committee members from different parts of Wales, and indeed from different organisations, because not only Principal Council Standards Committees were there, but I think the fire authorities were represented, the police authorities. So a useful day, and I'm sure Irene and Trevor will say something on it. So that's just a note, a summary note of the day. These tend to be biennial events now, so we won't have one next year, but there should be one in 2017, which would be useful anyway, because that'll be the start of the new councils. And yeah, as I say, a useful day, I thought.
Thank you, Rob. Irene, you're
Right,
eager to go
thank
first
you.
by the looks of it.
Thank you. Yes, I went not knowing obviously what to expect, and I was taken aback by the number that attended. And it was absolutely brilliantly organised, and the speakers were all excellent. But Nick Bennett was absolutely, well, he was very, very impressive. And I think we're very fortunate to have him as the Ombudsman. He explained to us how he handles complaints and how he prefers them to be dealt with locally, and how often members of the public write to him direct and he has to refer things back to committees. What amazed me was the amount of problems within councils, because we don't seem to have the problems that many other councillors have. But the general body of the conference was really informative, as I said, well organised. The workshops were very interesting. Obviously, I went to the one on community councillors. And again, I'm amazed that, I mean, whether it exists, I don't know, but the quarrelling that goes on amongst councillors themselves, and how rude they can be to one another. Now, I don't know whether I am a protected... and the abuse that some councillors have to put up with, and how that Rhondda and Taff had a sort of a subcommittee to deal with this. Now, it seems to be that a lot of this doesn't get as far as the Standards Committee, but there certainly are a lot of problems controlling the conduct of councillors, and in some places community councillors. Well, I think we must be quite well behaved in Monmouthshire, because our community council don't quarrel. You're smiling as if there's things going on we don't know about, but it was absolutely fascinating listening to other people's problems and thinking, for me, they don't exist with us. But very informative and really well attended and worthwhile. So, yeah, thank you.
I have a slightly different opinion on it. The conference I attended in Llandudno 2 years previously, I thought was excellent, because what they did, they took people from Standards Committee and they spread us around so that we could go into work groups and actually hear what other groups did. I found the conference in Cardiff was more a lecture format where somebody who, well informed, did a marvellous presentation. We sat in rows so that we weren't able to interact. There was opportunity for questions, but it tended to be an exchange of views rather than information. So I left the conference feeling as if I hadn't had the same experience that I'd had in Llandudno. And I think I missed out there, because I did find, I came back the last time saying that we were very reactive as opposed to being very sort of proactive. And I thought that was something that I wanted to bring back to this Standards Committee. When I left Cardiff, I was better informed, but only on certain topics, not on the way that other Standards Committees operated. So I personally didn't get as much out of it as I'd hoped to. So in terms of feedback, I don't know how I completed a feedback form the same as everybody else, but whether they will move to the same Llandudno format again, I can only hope they will.
In Llandudno, I wasn't up there, Trevor. It was more the discussion. Was it the workshops were more interactive, if you like, rather than sort of mini lectures? Yes, yeah. There was a sort of a subject to discuss, and then everyone went away into groups which would, you didn't sort of stick with your particular Standards Committee. You were mixed up, so you heard what Cardiff did, or and various parts of Wales. And I listened with an open mouth to some of the things that were going on in other areas, and how they dealt with them. That was really, really interesting. And each of the workshops I attended were conducted in the same way. Whereas the lecture format is great for imparting information, but not to really get to know what's happening in Standards Committees.
Well, thank you both for attending in the first place, and for the feedback. It's interesting that Irene, as a first-time attender, has a different view from Trevor, who's been to one before with the different formats, and it's useful to get that feedback. So, but obviously, Monmouthshire County councillors are all and town councillors and community councillors all seem to be very well behaved compared with other parts of Wales. So, Dave, sorry,
Chairman. There are sort of perhaps unfortunate councils within Wales where, in particular, they do have a real problem with some community councils that, touch wood, we don't seem to get here. But there are, yeah. But if, for example, Pembrokeshire had some issues with various complaints coming out from their community councils. But in Monmouthshire, mercifully, we've been fortunate. But there was some discussion about sort of standards of behaviour in the council chamber, and I forget who spoke on that. It might have been someone from Powys, I think, if I recall correctly. What members need to be aware of on that is this sort of Calver judgment, which is the High Court judge, and where we need to be careful to allow people and councillors specifically to have a sort of freedom of expression. And it's a difficult sort of balancing exercise, but Calver has certainly had an impact on, in particular, the Ombudsman and his decisions on whether or not to investigate matters or not. And at the moment, because he's got to pay attention